48 hours in Washington, D.C. could destroy careers. Jasmine Crockett is ready to expose a scandal that shocks the nation. Alan Dershowitz is prepared to fight back with everything he's got. Tension, betrayal, and truth collide. Who will survive this storm? Hold tight, what you're about to see could rewrite history before your eyes. The room was dark, heavy, with the kind of tension that made every breath feel like a gamble. Outside Washington, D.C., hummed with life, oblivious to the storm brewing in this hidden chamber. Cameras had been turned away. Reporters redirected. This hearing wasn't meant for the public eye. Yet the stakes were higher than anyone could imagine. Jasmine Crockett sat at the long, polished table, her eyes scanning the faces of aides, legal advisors, and government officials who whispered urgently behind closed doors. Jasmine Crockett's eyes locked on Alan Dershowitz across the table. Every detail of his smirk, the slight twitch of his fingers, the way he adjusted his glasses, it all spoke of decades of experience, of confidence earned in courtrooms and lecture halls. But Jasmine was ready. She wasn't here to be intimidated. Congresswoman Allen began, his voice smooth, deliberate, the kind that could sway juries and students alike. I've argued cases before the Supreme Court that set precedent for generations. Are you certain you're prepared for what this conversation demands? Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned forward slightly, the weight of her conviction radiating from every word. Professor Dershowitz, I'm not here to admire your resume. I'm here to hold the truth accountable, and I've prepared for every argument you think you can throw at me. For a moment, the room seemed to shrink, the air tense enough to hear heartbeats. Every aide and observer present felt the gravity. This was no ordinary debate. This was a clash of generations of experience versus principle, ego versus justice. Alan's eyes narrowed. Principle is fine, young lady, but legal nuance, context, years of practice, these aren't things you can summon overnight. The Constitution is complicated. Are you truly ready to face its complexity? Jasmine's lips curved into a calm, controlled smile. Professor, I've spent years defending voting rights in real courtrooms, not just theorizing in textbooks. You may have argued before the highest courts, but I fight for people whose lives are on the line. And today I intend to show that your own precedents support what I'm saying. Alan's smirk faltered for the first time. You're claiming knowledge of cases you couldn't possibly have studied in depth. I've studied them all, Jasmine replied, voice steady, almost surgical in precision. Davidson versus Miller, 1998. Your own words say the 14th Amendment must protect equal access to voting. Are you now arguing against yourself? A hush fell. Alan's fingers clenched subtly. His composure wavered. Jasmine's words cut like a scalpel, exposing cracks in the armor of authority he had relied on for decades. Every viewer, if this were broadcast, would see the tension, the shift in power. I didn't mean context matters, he stammered, trying to regain control. Jasmine leaned in further, her gaze unwavering. Context, professor, or convenience? You've defended presidents one day, condemned them the next. Voting rights, executive privilege, criminal immunity. You change your stance depending on who benefits. Today, the truth doesn't bend to your convenience. Alan swallowed, eyes darting, searching for any escape. But there was none. Jasmine held the battlefield with precision. Each point, each citation, each pause was a controlled strike, dismantling decades of arrogance. For a brief, electrifying moment, the room vibrated with intensity, the clash of intellect, experience, and unwavering principle. Every second amplified the stakes, every exchange a test of courage and endurance. Could Alan survive this unrelenting scrutiny? Or would Jasmine's unyielding logic prove that experience without consistency is powerless? The echo of the secret hearing still lingered in the hidden chamber. Papers were shuffled, whispers carried across the room, and Jasmine Crockett's eyes burned with a mix of fury and determination. She had seen enough in that session to know the stakes were far higher than anyone outside could imagine. Alan Dershowitz leaned back in his chair, calm but alert, every muscle coiled like a spring. He had anticipated confrontation, but Jasmine's intensity surprised even him. You think you can expose the truth without consequence? He asked, voice low, almost a challenge. Jasmine's jaw tightened. I don't care about consequences, she snapped. People deserve to know what's been hidden from them, and I will find out no matter who stands in my way. The room vibrated with tension. Every side glance, every subtle gesture carried meaning. Alan's aides hovered nearby, ready to strike verbally or legally, while Jasmine's small team huddled notes and evidence clutched tightly. Each moment felt like a heartbeat that could shatter the fragile balance. Suddenly, a file was passed discreetly to Jasmine. She flipped it open and froze. Bank transfers, off-the-record meetings, and shadowy connections sprawled across the pages like a spider's web. Alan noticed her reaction and smirked faintly. "Impressive," he said, "but impressive enough to survive what comes next." Jasmine stood her chair scraping against the floor, defiance radiating from her. "I won't back down," she said, "even if it's you who tries to bury it." Alan's eyes narrowed, calculating. The tension between them wasn't just professional, it was personal, almost electric. Outside, the world remained unaware. The media reported nothing, the public oblivious. But inside this hidden chamber, history was being shaped one calculated move and countermove at a time. Each document passed, each accusation whispered, carried the potential to ignite a scandal that could topple careers and shake the nation. Jasmine's heart pounded. "If we don't act now," she muttered to herself, "this will never see the light of day." Alan, equally aware, prepared to counter every step, every revelation. They were locked in a deadly dance of intellect and strategy, neither willing to yield. Every glance, every pause, every half-spoken word was a test of nerves. Who would break first? Who would falter under pressure? The unspoken war between them crackled in the air, heavy and electric, leaving no room for doubt that one of them would emerge victorious and the other would pay the price. Jasmine Crockett is facing Alan Dershowitz, and the stakes are sky high. Every word, every move could expose secrets that shake America. Power, truth, betrayal. They collide here and there's no turning back. The secret congressional hearing room was silent but alive with tension. Jasmine Crockett, clutching a folder containing over 3,200 pages of financial records detailing $47 million in off-the-books transactions funneled through shell corporations. Each page screamed corruption, and Jasmine knew every second counted. Alan Dershowitz was already there, leaning back with a smirk. "So, Congresswoman," he said, voice calm but razor sharp, "you think a pile of numbers can topple years of political machinery?" His eyes sparkled with challenge. Jasmine didn't flinch. She slammed the folder on the table. "These numbers aren't just statistics, Alan. They're evidence proof that they've been manipulating legislation for personal gain." She scanned the room. The aides, everyone felt the gravity. Alan raised a brow, flipping through the documents with deliberate slowness. "Manipulating legislation," he asked, tone-teasing, "or misreading numbers? You do realize, Congresswoman, a single decimal error can ruin your argument." A hush fell. The air thickened with every word. Jasmine took a deep breath and hit back. "I triple-checked every line, Alan. From the 2019 contract with Horizon Tech to the unreported $4.7 million that vanished into offshore accounts, you're looking at incontrovertible proof." Alan leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. "Proof or assumptions stitched together to sound convincing. You're gambling your career, your reputation," and he paused, eyes piercing hers. "Potentially your safety." Suddenly, a slip of paper slid under Jasmine's folder. A note. "Meet me after the hearing. The whistleblower has names." Her pulse spiked. She glanced at Alan, noting the slightest tightening of his jaw. The game was no longer just numbers. It was about people, power, and secrets. Alan straightened, locking eyes with her. "You're determined to drag this into the light, aren't you?" "I don't have a choice," Jasmine snapped. "The country deserves to know the truth, even if it destroys us both." The hearing erupted into a high-stakes duel. Jasmine cited specific dates: May 14, 2020, a $2.3 million transfer, intercepted emails proving policy manipulation, and internal memos with Alan's fingerprints unmistakably implied in advisory notes. Alan countered with legal nuance, dissecting her every word, turning statistics into questions of interpretation. Every exchange was electric, every rebuttal, a spark threatening to ignite chaos. The room was a crucible, intellect against intellect, evidence against rhetoric, courage against calculated strategy. Jasmine felt the weight of history. If she faltered, the story would vanish buried by power. But the thrill, the adrenaline, the responsibility to expose corruption kept her moving forward. Is Jasmine willing to risk her career, her safety, and everything she holds dear to expose the truth and confront Alan Dershowitz, one of the most formidable legal minds in America? The chamber was sealed, curtains, drawn guards stationed outside. What unfolded here would never reach the public, but its consequences could tear the system apart. The so-called hearing had become a war zone where words were weapons and silence was treason. Jasmine leaned forward, her files spread across the table, her voice sharpened by fire. Across from her, Alan exuded calm menace, the perfect mouthpiece for the powers that had bought him. Congresswoman Allen began smoothly. Your evidence, half-formed, half-verified, amounts to nothing more than political theater. Are we to run a government on rumors and spreadsheets? Jasmine's eyes flared. She slammed a folder onto the table, the sound reverberating like a gavel of judgment. Rumors. These are wire transfers. $447 million funneled through the Caymans, tied directly to Senator Caldwell's committee. 3 construction contracts inflated by 300%. Are you calling audited bank ledgers a bedtime story? Allen's lips curled into a smirk. Numbers are paper. Context is everything. A donation here, a fund there, it's all legal when framed correctly. What you have is smoke, not fire. Jasmine's voice rose, cutting like a blade. Tell that to the families in Detroit where schools are collapsing because federal funds were siphoned into phantom deals. Tell that to the veterans waiting years for care while lobbyists walk away with gold-line contracts. Allen's tone snapped, venom dripping through his words. Careful, Jasmine. You're not accusing shadows. You're accusing men who built this chamber you sit in. Men who can erase you with a single vote. Do you think your truth matters when the machine decides otherwise? Jasmine leaned in, unflinching, her stare unyielding. The machine doesn't scare me. If I fall, I'll drag every last one of them down with me. Allen's composure cracked, his voice booming across the room. You're playing with half-truths, and half-truths destroy careers, not empires. By the time the public sees the headlines, you'll be painted as a liar, a hysteric. And when that happens, every shred of your truth will rot with you. She did not blink. Then let them smear me. Because the truth doesn't need permission, it only needs time. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the rustle of a clerk's trembling hand, sliding an envelope toward Jasmine. She tore it open under Allen's gaze. Inside, ledgers, signatures, names carved into history itself. Senators, CEOs, judges. The conspiracy was deeper than even she imagined. Her breath caught, her voice dropping to a whisper. This isn't a scandal. It's a system. Allen leaned back, his smirk colder than stone. And systems don't fall, Congresswoman. People do. The truth had finally surfaced, but it was a weapon powerful enough to destroy anyone who dared to wield it. The hearing chamber had barely settled after Jasmine's last explosive reveal of the $47 million shadow transactions when Allen made his move. He knew the battlefield was no longer confined to wood-paneled rooms and sealed corridors. It was now the media, the airwaves, the very bloodstream of public opinion. Allen adjusted his tie, stepped into the studio lights of a primetime political broadcast, and unleashed his weapon words. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his tone calm, but edged with steel. What we are witnessing is not justice. It is a witch hunt led by an ambitious congresswoman desperate for attention. His words struck like bullets. Charts appeared on screen, data, twisted graphs, cropped selective leaks, spun into evidence of Jasmine's alleged bias. She claims there are secret payments, Allen continued, but fails to mention that these were lawful transfers reviewed and cleared. $7 million sounds terrifying until you see the context, and she deliberately hides it. Back in her office, Jasmine watched, fists clenched. The television's glow painted her face in cold blues and reds. He's turning truth into poison, she muttered. Her aide whispered, Congresswoman, if this sticks, you could be finished. Allen wasn't done. In a closed-door follow-up debate, he stared Jasmine down across the polished oak table. You're playing with fire, Jasmine. You think exposing this system makes you a hero, but what you're doing is destabilizing the very nation you swore to protect. Jasmine shot back, her voice tight with fury. Protecting a nation does not mean protecting its corruption. $7 million funneled through shell companies isn't patriotism, Alan. It's treason dressed in paperwork. Alan leaned forward, eyes glittering with menace. And yet you have no admissible evidence. No signed orders, no fingerprints, just whispers and half-truths. You're gambling your career on shadows. Her pulse thundered. She slammed the folder onto the table. Whispers don't create wire transfers. Numbers don't lie. The American people deserve the truth, even if it cost me everything. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the hum of hidden recorders. Alan's smirk returned. If you want war, Congresswoman, I'll give you war. But understand, wars are not won by truth. They're won by perception. And perception is mine to command. The next morning, headlines screamed Alan's narrative, Dershowitz exposes Crockett's witch hunt. Cable news anchors parroted his lines, questioning Jasmine's motives, hinting at her ambition, her supposed recklessness. Hashtags exploded, bots amplified, and suddenly half the country believed she was the villain. Her phone buzzed again. A message from the anonymous source. They're burying you. But I have something bigger. Page 63. She opened the file, her breath caught. If the numbers on page 47 had been a spark, this was a detonation. Jasmine whispered almost to herself. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about power at the highest level. Alan, meanwhile, stepped back into the studio, voice smooth as silk. The real scandal is not corruption. It's the dangerous obsession of one congresswoman trying to tear down the system. Cameras flashed, applause erupted, and the battlefield tilted in his favor. But somewhere deep inside, he knew Jasmine had not yet played her last card. What followed Alan Dershowitz's televised assault was not merely a public relations war. It was a secret hearing buried deep inside Capitol walls, stripped from the official record. The transcript, leaked years later in fragments, reveals a clash so fierce, it shook even the stone-faced committee members. At 9:47 p.m., the chamber was locked. Phones were confiscated. Only a handful of lawmakers and aides were allowed inside. The chairman's voice opened the record with chilling clarity. This session is off the books. Mr. Dershowitz, Ms. Crockett, proceed. Alan leaned forward, his voice carrying the sharpness of a blade. Congresswoman Crockett, the evidence against you is overwhelming. $7.3 million routed through ghost corporations, your signature appearing on authorizations. You stand here not as a defender of truth, but as its enemy. Jasmine's chair scraped back against marble. Her reply was steady, but her knuckles were white. You call them ghost corporations. I call them cover-ups, defense contracts, funneled into political pockets. You know it, Alan. You've defended worse. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. A senator whispered, "She's not supposed to say that." The stenographer hesitated, unsure if those words should be written. Alan's fist struck the table. Enough insinuations. The public will never believe you. I shape opinion. I shape the law. You, Jasmine, cut him off, her voice rising like a crack of thunder. You shape lies. Tell them about Armitage Global. Tell them about Novatech. Tell them how those shell companies aren't tied to me, but to your clients, lobbyists, and even a sitting judge. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. One committee member dropped his pen. Another demanded, strike that from the record. But Jasmine pressed harder. She held up a folder, thin but heavy with threat. I have documents, memos, ledgers, emails. And if I fall, these go public. You want to erase me, try, but you'll burn with me. Alan's eyes narrowed, his smile razor thin. Careful, Jasmine. Heroes often die before history decides if they were right. The tension was unbearable. Reportedly, one aide later described it as the moment when time itself stopped breathing. The transcript ends abruptly. No conclusion, no adjournment noted. Pages missing, redacted lines stamped classified. But the fragments that survive tell us this: Jasmine Crockett had crossed a line. She was no longer just defending herself. She was openly accusing Alan's network, daring him in a locked chamber where truth was not allowed to leave alive. That night, the war shifted. From public attacks to private survival, from courtroom debates to a shadow conflict where evidence was currency and silence was bought at any cost. And as Jasmine left that chamber, the cameras waiting outside never knew what had really happened behind those sealed doors. The silence after the hidden hearing was deafening. The metallic door slammed shut behind Jasmine Crockett, the echo still ringing in her ears like a funeral bell. Alan Dershowitz had smirked before leaving, taunting her with the words, "Heroes often die before history has the chance to judge them." Jasmine knew he was right about one thing. If she stayed silent, she would be finished. In darkness, she would be erased. So she chose the only path left: strike first. 3 days later, at precisely 8:00 a.m., Jasmine appeared before a room packed with reporters. No announcement, no press advisory, just shock. She walked to the podium and dropped a thick red binder onto the wood. The cover was stamped in bold, "Top Secret," classified. For a heartbeat, the room went dead silent. Then a blinding storm of camera flashes erupted, rattling the air like gunfire. Her voice cut through the chaos, each word heavy with defiance. They wanted the truth buried in darkness. Today, I put it under the light. These are the documents Alan Dershowitz and his network never wanted you to see. She flipped open the first-page bank records transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, $7.3 million in shadow money funneled through shell corporations. Each sheet she raised was projected onto the massive screen behind her, every line of numbers like a bullet tearing through the establishment. Reporters gasped, some already shouting into their phones. News outlets broke into live coverage without warning. Jasmine's voice hardened. This isn't just money. This is proof of a hidden power structure where laws bend and truth is bought. A journalist shouted from the front row, "Congresswoman Crockett, do you have evidence that sitting officials are involved?" Jasmine froze for a second, her eyes narrowing like a blade, then locked onto the cameras. "Yes. And if I disappear after today, those names are inside these documents." The room exploded with noise until another voice sliced through the uproar. From the back of the hall, Alan Dershowitz himself appeared, dressed in a dark suit, his presence chilling the air. Murmurs turned to gasp as he strode toward the stage, every step deliberate. With a mocking grin, he spoke, his tone laced with venom. "Jasmine, do you really think you can bring me down with scraps of paper? These vultures will devour whatever spectacle you throw at them. But when the truth is dissected, they'll see you for what you are, a desperate woman grasping at shadows." Jasmine's hand slammed against the podium, the crack echoing through the room. Her eyes blazed, her voice thundered. "You call it desperation. I call it survival. I'm not fighting to beat you, Alan. I'm fighting so the American people know they've been betrayed by the very men they trusted." For a moment, time stopped. The room was chaos, reporters, screaming cameras, shaking security frozen mid-step. Yet Jasmine and Alan stood motionless, locked in a silent war of wills, eyes fixed on each other like duelists in the final round. Neither blinked. Neither yielded. And in that charged instant, it became clear this was no longer a routine political scandal. This was the opening salvo of a war, one that would consume everything and leave no one untouched. The storm Jasmine unleashed did not fade, it multiplied. For 48 hours, her name dominated every screen, every feed, every whispered conversation in Washington. But then came the counterstrike. Alan Dershowitz, master of courtroom theatrics, moved faster than anyone expected. Within hours, he called his own press conference, and the stage was set for a public demolition. Standing before a wall of American flags, Alan's voice carried the venom of a serpent wrapped in the armor of patriotism. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed from Congresswoman Crockett was nothing short of political, theater-fabricated lies, forged documents, a desperate stunt from a sinking politician who wants to drag us all into the abyss with her." He raised a glossy folder of his own bank statements, affidavits, expert analyses, all designed to slice through Jasmine's credibility. He held them high like weapons. "I will not allow this nation to be deceived by manufactured evidence. I challenge her to prove line by line that these documents are not the work of fraud." Cameras zoomed in, capturing his icy glare. The effect was immediate. Networks split-screened his words against Jasmine's press event, painting her as both whistleblower and potential liar. Hashtags trended in opposite directions. Hashtags Crockett Truth versus hashtags Crockett Lies. Allies who once stood by her began issuing cautious statements. A senator who had praised her courage 2 days before now muttered on camera, "If these documents are indeed fabricated, it's a grave betrayal of public trust." The shadows were closing in. Jasmine watched in silence from her office. Her fists clenched, her phone buzzing with texts from advisors. "We're losing support fast. The narrative is slipping. If we don't strike back, you're finished." Her chest tightened. For the first time, doubt crept in. Could she have underestimated Alan? That night, an emergency hearing closed to the public, hidden from cameras, was convened. The room was dim, thick with tension. Jasmine entered first, her binder clutched like a lifeline. Moments later, Alan arrived, his stride confident, his smirk sharper than ever. He didn't sit. He leaned across the table, his words low and venomous. "You think you've cornered me, Jasmine? You've only signed your own execution order?" Her voice trembled, but held firm. "The truth doesn't need permission to exist, Alan. It only needs one person brave enough to speak it." He chuckled, the sound cold and merciless. "Truth, or your version of it. The public loves a martyr until they realize she built her cross out of lies." The committee chair slammed his gavel, demanding order, but the duel had already begun. Jasmine spread her pages across the table. Financial trails, coded communications, testimonies buried deep within classified archives. Alan countered with forensic experts' reports claiming her evidence was tampered with, digital fingerprints suggesting manipulation. Each word was a dagger, each rebuttal a fresh wound. At one point, Alan leaned so close their faces were inches apart. "When this is over, your name will be mud, your career a cautionary tale. History won't remember you as a fighter, Jasmine. It'll remember you as a fraud." Jasmine's eyes burned, her voice cracked but thunderous. "Better to die fighting for truth than to live fattened on lies. If history damns me, let it damn me for trying." Silence choked the chamber. The committee members exchanged uneasy glances. Cameras might not have been present, but the weight of that exchange would ripple beyond these walls. Outside, America was splitting down the middle. Who was telling the truth? Who was the deceiver? The shadows had fully closed in, and the war was no longer just political, it was existential. By the time the hidden hearings tension began to subside, a new bombshell landed, this one wearing the name Colleen Rowley, a former FBI special agent turned whistleblower during the post-9/11 era. She wasn't a faceless insider, she was a known figure, a voice of integrity, and she walked into that clandestine chamber as cameras were barred and recordings forbidden. At exactly 11:23 p.m., the locked doors opened once more. Colleen stepped inside, her FBI credentials still in hand, and placed a worn binder on the tabletop before Jasmine and Alan. The room seemed to gasp. The chair creaked as one senator whispered, "Rowley, she's a legend." Her voice was calm but carried the weight of suppressed truths. "I'm here because I helped expose injustice before, and I see it again now. The $7.3 million was just a distraction. This binder contains chain of command memos, wire approval emails, recordings detailing how shell companies were used to funnel up to $50 million. Names are there, senators, judges, lobbyists, protected by Mr. Dershowitz's network." Gasps echoed. Alan's jaw clenched and he spoke measuredly. "Rowley, you may be respected, but who's paying you? Are you telling the truth or feeding us another fantasy?" Jasmine felt her heart hammering as she watched Rowley's steady eyes. "I'm not taking a side. I'm taking a stand for truth. But if what she says is real," she paused, "it devastates the entire system." Alan's response was cutting. "The public will see you as her accomplice, a celebrated whistleblower backing a reckless crusade." Rowley opened the binder, displaying photographs of signed memos, redacted only by black bars. The committee members leaned forward. "You want names? Here they are, self-serving officials hiding behind my silence. I risked everything then. I risk everything now." Tension gripped the chamber. One aide quietly began tearing pages from her notebook. Another's pen trembled. Jasmine swallowed. Was this help? Or another trap? The moment ended without resolution. The binder remained a detonator of truth. Colleen Rowley exited into the shadows, leaving Jasmine and Alan staring at each other across the table, breathless. The question echoed louder than any gunshot: is this legendary whistleblower an ally, or has she walked into a nest of vipers? The Capitol dome loomed in silence, its marble halls transformed into an arena where reputations and truths would live or die. Behind closed doors, the congressional hearing was not just about policy, it had become a battlefield. Cameras were limited, transcripts heavily redacted, but those who were present swore they had never seen such raw electricity in the air. At the center sat Jasmine Crockett, her hands gripping the edge of the table, eyes blazing with a defiance that seemed to burn through the chamber. Opposite her, Alan Dershowitz adjusted his glasses, his lips curling into the faint smile of a predator about to strike. The chairman's gavel slammed. Order. This session will proceed. Alan rose first, his voice booming with practiced authority. Members of the committee, what you are witnessing is not bravery. It is a calculated fabrication. Ms. Crockett is parading half-truths, forged documents, and emotional theatrics designed to topple institutions that have stood for centuries. He paused, letting the words sink like poison. And I, for one, will not allow this charade to continue unchecked. Jasmine stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the polished floor. You call this a charade? Tell that to the whistleblowers who vanished after daring to speak out. Tell that to the American people whose taxes disappeared into offshore accounts. Alan, you can twist the law, but you cannot twist the truth. The room rippled with murmurs. Cameras flashed even though they weren't supposed to. Alan's smile widened. Ms. Crockett, truth without evidence is nothing but noise. And noise, well, it dies in time. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Then explain these signatures, Alan. Explain the $47 million funneled through shell corporations, linked to names you defended in court. Were those noises too? A hush fell. Even the chairman froze, his gavel hovering midair. Alan's eyes flickered just for a moment, betraying the first crack in his armor. But then he snapped back, his tone colder than steel. Conspiracy theories dressed as evidence do not make reality. You risk not only your career, Ms. Crockett, but the very stability of this nation. Jasmine's hands trembled, not with fear, but with restrained fury. She whispered into the microphone, every syllable deliberate. Stability built on corruption is not stability. It's rot. And I will burn through every layer of it, even if it takes me down too. The hearing erupted. Lawmakers shouted over one another, some demanding her immediate censure, others calling for a deeper investigation. Amid the chaos, Jasmine and Alan locked eyes, a silent acknowledgement that this was no longer politics. This was war. And as the session recessed, whispers spread through the corridors of power. Someone was lying. But who? The corridors of the Capitol were silent. But behind one set of oak doors, the storm was raging. Jasmine Crockett sat across from Alan Dershowitz, the air between them so thick with hostility it felt combustible. A folder of classified documents lay on the polished table, sealed with red tape, the very symbol of the truth they fought to either protect or bury. Alan's lips curled into a cold smirk. You've played your hand too early, Jasmine. Leaks don't just destroy reputations, they end careers. And sometimes they end their lives. His words were not shouted, but hissed like venom, the kind only meant for ears inside these walls. Jasmine leaned forward, voice steady but sharp enough to cut steel. Then you should be worried, Alan, because this leak isn't just about corruption, it's about who authorized it. And I can assure you, your fingerprints are all over it. The chamber erupted as Senator Lindsey Graham, face flushed with fury, slammed his fist onto the table so hard the microphones rattled. Enough of this circus, he thundered, teeth clenched. Either bring irrefutable evidence to the table or admit this is nothing but a smear campaign. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her gaze locked with Graham's, unyielding. Senator, the evidence is here, she said, her hand tapping the folder. But the real question is, will you allow it to see the light of day, or will you bury it like the others? Alan's laugh was sharp, mocking, echoing like glass shattering in the room. You overestimate yourself. Documents can vanish. Witnesses can disappear. Even ambitious young congresswomen can be. Silenced. His pause was deliberate, the threat unmistakable. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed Jasmine's eyes, but it hardened into defiance. "Try me," she whispered, voice low but dangerous. The senators exchanged uneasy glances. Whispers rippled through the chamber. The price of truth was no longer theoretical. It was bleeding into their reality. Senator Graham leaned in again, voice dropping to a growl. "Do you have any idea what kind of fire you're playing with? You're not just challenging Allen. You're challenging the very machinery that keeps this country running." Jasmine snapped back. "If that machinery runs on lies and blackmail, then it deserves to burn." The silence that followed was suffocating. Every eye turned between Jasmine Allen and the folder that could ignite Washington like a powder keg. Allen finally leaned back, his tone deceptively calm. "Then let's see if you survive long enough to open it." In Washington, accidents rarely go unquestioned, especially when they happen to politicians challenging entrenched power. Hours after a closed-door hearing filled with hostile exchanges, Representative Jasmine Crockett narrowly escaped a violent car collision just outside the Capitol. The timing raised immediate suspicion. Inside that earlier meeting, tensions had erupted. Senator Lindsey Graham, visibly agitated, slammed his hand against the table and warned through clenched teeth, "If you keep dragging this circus into the light, Crockett, you won't even make it to your next hearing." Multiple staffers confirmed hearing the outburst, though none would go on record publicly. That evening, Crockett's vehicle was struck at high speed by a black SUV that fled the scene. Her car spun across the highway, leaving shattered glass and twisted metal scattered across the asphalt. She survived with minor injuries. Investigators later found no skid marks suggesting the SUV had attempted to brake. More unsettling was what followed. According to one aide, a message appeared on Crockett's phone shortly after the crash. "Stop now or next time we won't miss." The source of the text remains unknown. Its sender used a disposable number routed through multiple international servers. Law enforcement publicly treated the crash as a traffic incident. Privately, however, several insiders admitted it bore the hallmarks of a political warning. "This wasn't random," one congressional staffer said under condition of anonymity. "It was designed to shake her, remind her that the game she's playing has consequences." In the days after Alan Dershowitz's remark during the hearing replayed in her mind, "You think the truth protects you, Jasmine. The truth is what we say it is." For Crockett, the near-death experience underscored a grim reality. Her fight was no longer confined to committee rooms or press conferences. The battle had spilled onto the streets where shadows and silence spoke louder than official statements. The question remained, could she survive long enough to see her mission through? The crash should have been the peak of danger, but for Jasmine Crockett, it was only the beginning. Shaken yet unbroken, she walked back into the hidden committee chamber 2 nights later. The air was heavy, as if the marble walls themselves were holding their breath. What she didn't know was that her deadliest wound would not come from the SUV, but from the knife of betrayal held by someone she trusted most. When the session began, Alan Dershowitz leaned forward with his sharp smile, sliding a thick folder across the table. "Before we proceed, Representative Crockett, I think you should hear this from your own ally." His words sliced the silence. Jasmine frowned, her pulse quickening. Slowly, the folder was opened. Inside were transcripts, private strategy calls, confidential notes, even her personal remarks, word for word, all leaked. Her heart dropped. Only one person had access to those conversations, Daniel Hargrove, her longtime advisor, the man she once described as the brother I never had. Suddenly, the betrayal was undeniable. The doors clanged shut behind her, locking like a prison. Dershowitz's voice turned razor sharp. "Your own man sold you out. You thought you were untouchable. He came to us, Crockett. He chose survival over loyalty." "That's the truth." Jasmine's breath hitched. "You're lying," she whispered, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. A recording played through the speakers. Daniel's voice calm but cold. "Jasmine thinks she can take them down. She doesn't understand they will kill her before she gets close. I'd rather be on the winning side." Her knees nearly buckled. She felt the chamber spin as the reality sank in. Her inner circle was compromised. There was no safe space left. Alan leaned back, eyes glittering with satisfaction. "The enemy you fight isn't just across the aisle, Jasmine. He's sitting in your office wearing your trust like a mask." Then leaning closer, he whispered, so only she could hear, And if your closest ally can betray you, imagine how quickly the rest will follow. The room was suffocating. Her allies avoided her gaze. Her enemies smiled in silence. For the first time, Jasmine felt utterly alone. Betrayal didn't just weaken her case, it shattered the foundation she was standing on. But in that silence, a new fire burned behind her eyes. The betrayal hurt, but it also confirmed what she already suspected: the conspiracy was deeper, darker, and more ruthless than she could have ever imagined. And now survival was no longer just about politics, it was life or death. Or the heavy oak doors of the hidden congressional chamber closed with a deep thud, sealing Alan Dershowitz inside the suffocating silence. Across the long mahogany table, Jasmine Crockett's gaze burned into him, steady, unwavering, as though she could see through every layer of his carefully built defenses. The events of the past week still echoed in Alan's head: the betrayals, the suspicious accident, the leak that nearly destroyed Jasmine. He had fought ruthlessly for his clients, using every weapon of law and rhetoric, but for the first time in decades, the weight of the lives crushed beneath his words clawed at him. Senator Chuck Schumer broke the silence, his voice sharp, impatient. "Alan, your loyalty to these men, these institutions, has consequences. People are dying in the shadows while you defend corruption under the guise of law. How long do you plan to play this game?" The words struck deeper than Alan expected. He clenched his fists under the table, forcing calm onto his face. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice cutting the air like a blade. "Tell me, Alan, when you lay your head down at night, do you hear them?" The whistleblowers silenced, the staffers ruined, the families destroyed. "Does the law absolve you of that blood? Or is it only your conscience you're bargaining with?" Her tone wasn't theatrical, it was surgical, designed to cut into the one place he had never let anyone reach. Alan exhaled slowly, but his mind betrayed him. With flashes, he couldn't suppress a young intern he once cross-examined until she broke into tears. Her career collapsing. A witness whose testimony he twisted until truth became lies, leaving a family shattered. For years, he had told himself it was all part of the fight. Justice wasn't about truth, it was about winning. But now, staring at Jasmine, he felt the facade cracking. "Be careful, Congressman," Alan replied, his voice lower than usual, almost a growl. "Truth is a weapon, yes, but it cuts both ways. You act as though you hold the moral high ground, but I have seen politicians just like you twist it for their own gain." Jasmine's jaw tightened. "Maybe, but I've never watched the innocent bleed so I could protect the guilty." The tension in the room snapped like glass under pressure. For the first time, Alan felt exposed, not because of evidence, but because Jasmine had forced him to confront himself. He stood abruptly, pacing the room, hands shaking, despite his effort to steady them. His reputation was built on certainty-controlled dominance, but now every corner of his mind screamed with contradictions. Senator Schumer slammed his hand on the table. "Enough evasions, Alan. You can either be remembered as a brilliant lawyer who defended power, or as the man who finally chose truth. Which legacy will you die with?" Alan froze. His throat tightened as if an invisible hand gripped it. The weight of decades pressed on his shoulders. Could he walk away from everything? Could he betray the clients who made him rich, powerful, untouchable? Or worse, could he betray himself, admitting that the life he built was anchored on lies? Jasmine whispered almost too softly to hear, but every syllable cut like thunder. "The difference between you and me, Alan, is that I still believe in redemption. But redemption requires sacrifice. Can you bleed for the truth as much as you've bled for power?" Alan's eyes locked onto hers. For the first time in his career, he had no immediate retort. Only silence. Thick, suffocating silence settled over the chamber, while the storm inside him raged louder than any courtroom battle he had ever fought. The atmosphere in the closed hearing room remained suffocating, a tangle of whispered rumors, scattered documents, and mounting suspicion. Alan's explosive words triggered a network of stealth leaks, quietly appearing on underground political blogs, internal emails, and the occasional investigative dispatch. No headlines on CNN or Fox News, just hushed reports from outlets like ProPublica or The Intercept, hinting at a turning point from a sealed room, a confession from the heart of power. The majority of the public remained oblivious. The world outside slept in its illusion of calm. Inside the room, Senator Chuck Grassley, RIA, the most senior senator in Congress, slammed his decades-worn fist onto the polished wood table, voice edged with controlled fury. Dershowitz, you've brought us to the brink. Do you understand the consequences that you've ripped open doors that were meant to stay closed? Allen met Grassley's gaze without flinching. His response was quiet but resolute. I know, but the truth was buried too long. If there's a price to pay, I'll pay it. Silence enveloped them, so thick it seemed to absorb every breath. There were no cameras, no live broadcasts, only powerful figures unsettled, holding fragments of truth that should never have surfaced. Information existed only in muted leaks, clandestine calls, and the trembling hands of a wary senator. Jasmine leaned in, whispering, "If you've chosen this path, Allen, prepare yourself. We will not only face enemies out there, but the ones inside this room." Allen's look held steady, his reply, soft yet unwavering. "Then let the truth judge us all." The doors closed, but from the darkness beyond, whispers continued to spread. A storm without fanfare, but bound to engulf every power corridor in the Capitol. The air in the sealed chamber was still trembling after Allen's declaration, when suddenly the heavy iron doors creaked open. Every gaze snapped toward the figure entering, a final witness face, half covered by a surgical mask, eyes glinting like cold steel. The sound of his shoes echoed across the marble floor, each step tightening the noose of tension. Senator Chuck Grassley frowned, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence. "We did not authorize anyone else in this hearing. Who is this?" The stranger removed his mask. Shock froze the room. It was John Whitmore, former senior White House advisor, vanished from politics years ago. He ignored everyone but Allen and Jasmine, his stare unyielding. Whitmore laid a thick dossier on the table with a resonant thud. His voice was deliberate, razor sharp. "You've all played this game of deception long enough, but tonight it ends. Inside this file are documents proving not just individuals, but an entire network of top officials have manipulated law, money, even wars to protect their private interests." Jasmine leaned forward, her voice taut as wire. "Who are you accusing, Whitmore? Say it clearly. There's no turning back now." Whitmore let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Say it, fine. The first name is sitting right here." He turned, eyes locked on Grassley. Gasps rippled across the chamber, panic spreading like wildfire. Grassley slammed his fist on the table, roaring, "You dare slander me?" Allen interjected, eyes blazing. "Enough. If what Whitmore says is true, we're staring at the greatest crime in modern political history." Jasmine's words sliced the air, steady but merciless. "No one in this room is innocent. Once that file is opened, it won't just destroy a few names. It will reduce the entire foundation of power you've built to ashes." The silence that followed was worse than any explosion. Everyone knew from this moment forward there was no way back. That dossier on the table was the detonator, and all it would take was one hand to open it to unleash a truth capable of shattering the world outside, even if it still remained unaware. The air in the chamber remained thick after the revelations from the previous hearing. Internal memos and leaked documents hovered like silent witnesses, a power structure tottering. As Jasmine took the floor, her voice quiet but resolute echoed, "If truth can't save our conscience, silence will be complicit with guilt." Suddenly, the room brightened as the door opened. Enter Senator Orrin Hatch, a symbol of reserved restraint in Washington for 42 years. All eyes turned. Hatch, long known for staying clear of the fray, announced his resignation. "Right then, I can no longer look away. Silence now is complicity. I step aside so the truth might finally be heard." The reaction was seismic. Young senators applauded. Others looked away, stunned. Allen sat motionless under the stark lights, as if he'd lost a bulwark he had always relied on. Jasmine held her breath, her eyes glistened. A living legend had just crossed the floor. That moment shattered the wall. Though mainstream media hadn't caught up yet, investigative reporters were already at work piecing together the fallout. A faint glimmer of hope emerged that Americans might finally hear the truth and begin to believe in democracy again. Will American society have the courage to learn and change from this wound, or will it walk past it in silence once more? The echoes of Senator Orrin Hatch's unexpected resignation still lingered within the marble walls of the Capitol. There was no official broadcast, no ticker headline flashing across national television. Outside, America moved on as if nothing had happened. Commuters rushed to work, families tuned in to mundane economic reports. But behind heavy curtains and guarded doors, Washington trembled. The familiar corridors now felt suffocating like tunnels packed with secrets. Congressional aides brushed past one another without eye contact. Hurried phone calls ended mid-sentence as if someone might be listening. No one beyond these walls knew that the resignation of one of the Senate's oldest pillars was not an act of fatigue, but the first fracture of a looming collapse. Inside a windowless chamber, amber light spilled across thick stacks of files. No reporters, no audience, only faces drawn, tight eyes darting like knives, waiting for the first betrayal. At the center, Jasmine Crockett sat upright, clutching a dossier. Across from her, Alan Dershowitz leaned back with his arms folded, a cold smirk etched on his lips. "You really think dragging one old man down ends this?" Alan's voice cut through the silence, slow and metallic. "The Capitol has survived scandal after scandal. One name falling means nothing." Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her breath quick, as if holding back a flood of fury. "No, Alan. This isn't about one man. It's a confession. When Orrin Hatch, a symbol of silence itself, buckles and walks away, it's not a stumble. It's the crumbling of the foundation you've been standing on." Alan laughed, a dry, brittle sound that made aides in the back stiffen. "Naive as ever, Jasmine. Power doesn't collapse because one man defects. It shifts. And I promise you, when this storm clears, it'll be you swept away first." The air thickened, heavy like the oxygen had been drained. Somewhere a pen tapped nervously against wood, ticking down the seconds like a bomb timer. Jasmine lowered her eyes to the file, flipping it open. Photographs, memos, signatures spilling onto the table like contraband evidence. "Do you really think you can bury this forever? A secret buried too long becomes uncontainable, even by its keepers." Alan leaned forward, fury flashing in his eyes. "Release those, and you'll regret it. Not just your career, your life." Jasmine lifted her head, her eyes burning with defiance. There are moments when fear means nothing. This is when truth walks out of the shadows. A suffocating silence fell. Every person in the room understood there was no turning back. The words spoken, the evidence on the table, they were no longer bargaining chips. They were a lit fuse. And while America outside went on oblivious, deep inside the Capitol, the first tremors of a political earthquake had begun. The chamber had grown colder since Orrin Hatch's resignation was whispered into the record, as if the very walls themselves recoiled from what they had just absorbed. No cameras, no reporters, only the suffocating knowledge that a line had been crossed. Everyone inside knew that history was being written in a room America would never see. Jasmine Crockett remained upright, her dossier spread open before her like a weapon. The photographs, the memos, the letters, they no longer felt like paper, but like shrapnel primed to detonate. Her eyes burned not with fear, but with a grim resolve carved by every sleepless night leading to this moment. Across the table, Alan Dershowitz no longer wore his smirk. His jaw was tight, the weight of decades pressing down on him. His voice cracked not in weakness, but in rage. "You think you're courageous, Jasmine? You think brandishing secrets makes you righteous? Look around you." These men, he gestured to the aides and clerks whose hands trembled just out of sight. "They'll forget you the second this chamber empties. But me? My name is written into the fabric of American law. You can't erase that with a few pages." Jasmine leaned forward, her voice low, but sharp enough to slice through the thick silence. "It's not about erasing, Alan. It's about revealing. You built a fortress out of silence, and now the cracks are showing. Orrin Hatch was your wall, and he crumbled. Do you know what happens to walls once one stone falls? They don't stand, they collapse." Alan slammed his hand on the table, the sound ricocheting like a gunshot. Aides flinched. One file slid off the stack and fell to the floor, spilling its contents. A photograph landed face up, half in shadow. A handshake, a sealed deal, an image that had no business existing outside a vault. Alan's face was drained of color. You don't understand the price of what you're doing, he hissed, voice trembling between fury and desperation. Truth doesn't liberate, it destroys. You'll unleash chaos on institutions that barely hold this country together. Jasmine's lips tightened. Maybe chaos is what we need. Maybe the lie we've been living under is more dangerous than the storm that follows. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Only the dull hum of the air vent filled the silence like a machine, indifferent to the human implosion happening beneath it. Alan leaned back, shoulders sagging, eyes haunted. He whispered so softly it barely reached the others. Do you know how many lives I ruined to keep this intact? How many compromises, how many silences I carved out of my own soul? Jasmine's gaze didn't waver. And was it worth it? Sitting here now, cornered by the truth you thought you could bury, was it worth it? Alan's reply came as a broken laugh, bitter and hollow. It bought me power. It bought me relevance. But it never bought me peace. His hand trembled as he reached for the fallen photo, clutching it, as though it were the last piece of his armor. And now, thanks to you, Jasmine, it buys me ruin. She rose slowly, each movement deliberate, her voice steady. This isn't about me, Alan. It's about what comes after you. Every scar you carved into this country will be remembered. And maybe, just maybe, people will learn not to repeat them. Alan's eyes locked on hers, blazing with a mix of hatred and reluctant respect. History doesn't remember martyrs, kindly Jasmine. It devours them. She held his gaze unflinching. Then let it devour me. At least I'll go knowing I tore the mask off your empire. The chamber fell into silence again, but it was no longer the silence of secrecy. It was the silence of aftermath of wounds freshly opened. Jasmine Crockett stood as a symbol of defiance carved into flesh and steel, while Alan Dershowitz, once untouchable, sat shattered, forced to confront the cost of every silence he had ever kept. And though the world outside still hurried along in ignorance, a truth had been born here, scarred, painful, irreversible. The question lingering like smoke, would anyone ever be allowed to see it? The hearing room was as heavy as a prison without light. After the fierce clash of words, the breaths of both Jasmine and Alan seemed to blend into the metallic stench of the shattered microphone. The ceiling fan creaked its cold rhythm, drowning every trace of life. No one spoke, yet the tension hung in the air like a dagger suspended by a thread. Alan leaned back in his chair, bloodshot eyes glaring, his voice hoarse. You think you've won, Jasmine? You think those words will change anything? There's no recording, no public record, everything will sink, as if it never existed. Jasmine stood tall, her gaze like ice cutting through him. You're wrong, Alan. Even if this room is sealed off, the truth has already been spoken. Once it's uttered, it never disappears. It hides, it seeps, and in the end it explodes. Alan roared, slamming his fists against the table, sending papers flying everywhere. You're dragging this entire system down with you. Don't you understand? One word from you can burn careers, shatter governments, unleash chaos on millions. And then those very people will hate you. They'll curse you until you die. Jasmine stepped closer, her breath nearly brushing his face, her voice low, sharp as a blade. If what you call stability relies on lies and silencing the truth, then it deserves to burn. Truth may be merciless, but silence is the true killer. Alan laughed, but the sound trembled, shattering like glass. You're naive. You won't survive this. The machinery of power will crush you, Jasmine. No one escapes. No one. For a moment, Jasmine froze. Then, lowering her voice to a chilling whisper, she delivered her verdict. Maybe I won't escape, but I don't need to. I just need to leave a crack. And through that crack, the light will enter. A deadly silence swallowed the room. Alan stared at her, torn between hatred and despair. His trembling hand reached for a faded family photo hidden in his pocket, his fingers gripping it so hard they turned white. In that instant, all his power, prestige, and steel armor crumbled, exposing nothing but a broken man drowning in the shadows of his past. Jasmine bent down, gathering the scattered files. She stacked them neatly, then placed them back on the table as if sealing an indictment impossible to deny. Looking straight into Alan's eyes, her words fell heavy, each syllable, like a hammer striking the coffin of his empire. The truth has its cost, but if no one is willing to pay it, society will never change. Alan shut his eyes. His body collapsed into the chair, still clutching the old photograph, like a drowning man clinging to a final scrap of wood. A mournful silence wrapped around him. Jasmine turned and walked away. Her heels struck the floor in sharp, hollow echoes, like a drum beat heralding an irreversible downfall. The heavy door creaked shut behind her, its sound cold final, like the gavel of a judge sealing fate. In the darkness that remained, only Alan was left alone, shattered and haunted by those last words echoing like a sentence that would never end. When the dust settles, one truth remains. Silence is safe, but it builds cages. Truth is dangerous, but it opens doors. Every step toward honesty shakes the ground beneath us, yet it is the only path that leads to real freedom. So I ask you, what cage of silence are you still locked inside, and when will you dare to break it? This story is a work of reflection, not a record of real events. Thank you for walking this journey with us. If it stirred something in you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Until the next video, stay unafraid.